Welcome to our WISH symposium. My name's Lisa Elliott. I'm co-chair of the WISH committee. So on behalf of my other co-chairs, Christine Burgess and Susie Calkins, along with our fantastic WISH team who are making all this magic happen, I want to welcome you both here and via Zoom to what I'm sure will be an informative and thought-provoking seminar by Lilia Cortina. Today's topic on sexual and gender harassment is frustratingly still too prominent to ignore when discussing women's advancement in STEM and healthcare. It's also unavoidable during a year that we've dedicated to exploring women's bodies under the microscope. The theme was urgently inspired by the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling last June overturning Roe v. Wade. And those of you who joined us last month heard an outstanding talk by Katie Watson on how we square women's personhood with the denial of reproductive liberty. If you missed it, you can view Professor Watson's seminar, along with Wellesley President Paula Johnson's keynote talk on women's health from our fall symposium, all on our WISH YouTube channel. Now I'm going to turn it over to Elena Barbato, who will be introducing Dr. Cortina. Elena joined RFU a year ago to become our Director of Title IX Compliance and Equity Officer within the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Prior to this, she served as Title IX and ADA Coordinator at the College of Lake County. Elena received her bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois and then received her JD from Southern Illinois School of Law, followed by a master's in psychology from Sophia University in Palo Alto. She's a licensed attorney, a licensed marriage and family therapist, an elected city councilwoman, and as I just noticed, she's on the ballot to serve as trustee for the College of Lake County, so be sure to vote. We're very fortunate that she joined RFU. So please welcome Elena Barbato, who will be introducing today's speaker.
To have the honor and privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Lilia Cortina. She caught our attention when the National Academy of Sciences published some of her work on sexual harassment of women, let me get this right, in the academic sciences, engineering, and medicine. So we looked a little further into Dr. Cortina's work, and we discovered an academic, a researcher, and faculty member on the cutting edge of the topic of sexual harassment and related topics. We found that she has over 100 publications, numerous speaking engagements, and awards. She holds a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, go Illini, and a master's from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in psychology, and a BA in psychology from Pomona College in California. But let's begin at the beginning, and let's learn a little bit more about our esteemed speaker. So Dr. Cortina grew up in a politically liberal household. Lilia Margaret Cortina was exposed to a feminist ethos early on. This environment primed her passion for bringing feminism into her career as a psychologist. Her mother was involved in the women's movement and without an explicit label introduced her daughter to many feminist values which influenced Cortina's outlook and orientation. Although she had strong beliefs about sexism and equity, it wasn't until her undergraduate studies at Pomona College that she discovered the feminist theory and research that supported her personal beliefs. While pursuing her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Cortina became heavily involved in the research laboratory of Dr. Louise Fitzgerald. Here, her research focused on sexual harassment, gender fairness, and gender bias in federal courts. Although Cortina's interest in feminist psychology had been piqued in her undergraduate years during a Psychology of Women course, it crystallized under the supervision of Fitzgerald, who was a powerful feminist role model. Cortina recalls that feminism was woven into the fabric of the lab, and she learned to infuse her own work with a similar perspective. Occasionally, Cortina would present at the Association for Women in Psychology conference, and she published her first article in the Journal of Psychology of Women Quarterly. She was also trained in feminist psychotherapy. In her dissertation, she studied Latinas' experiences of sexual harassment in the workplace after noticing their lack of representation in the existing literature. She investigated sexual harassment defined by Latinas via surveys, including both verbal and nonverbal. For example, nonverbal, being leered at, and verbal, use of inappropriate terms of address. Her graduate school experience solidified Cortina's passion for research, steering her away from clinical work towards a career in academia. She began a position at the University of Michigan, where she is now, as a professor of social and feminist psychology with a cross appointment in women's studies. One of the undergraduate courses she teaches is Psychology of Women, where she teaches her studies about gender, sexuality, and social inequality. She notes that by the end of each course, the number of students who openly identify as feminists tends to double. She also strongly encourages her students to channel their anger regarding social injustices into action. I love that. Cortina has focused on low-level, everyday workplace incivility, a topic that has garnered much attention within the industrial organization, or IO, psychology community. She advocates for the consideration of feminist theory within the IO psychology field, and although limited, she notes that there has been a recent increase in openness to gender and diversity issues in IO psychology. During her work on hostile work environments, Cortina has investigated gender harassment, a subset of sexual harassment that includes common everyday sexism, such as insults, comments, jokes, and graffiti based on or in reference to a person's gender. Cortina explains that despite its significant impact on mental health, gender harassment is often overlooked. Since 2015, Cortina has been an associate director for the advanced program at University of Michigan. Here she applies psychological research to intervention programs designed to decrease bias and promote diversity and inclusivity in the faculty workplace via workshops, mentoring committees, and programming. Nominated for the American Psychological Association's prestigious Strickland Daniel Mentoring Award, Cortina credits her own mentoring abilities to Louise Fitzgerald and other senior graduate students during her time in graduate school. She mentors both PhD and undergraduate honor students and hosts bi-weekly meetings to discuss research with her students and mentees. Some of her selected works include Researching Rudeness, the Past, Present, and Future of the Science of Incivility, Feminist Perspectives on Building a Better Psychological Science of Gender, Sex-Based Harassment and Employment, New Insights into Gender and Context, Gender Harassment, Broadening Our Understanding of Sex-Based Harassment at Work, Unseen Injustice, Incivility as Modern Discrimination in Organizations, and Profiles and Coping, Responses to Sexual Harassment Across Persons, Organizations, and Cultures. Also, Sexual Harassment of Women, Feminist Perspectives on Building a Better Psychological Science of Gender. She has received Fellow of the American Psychological Association Award, University of Michigan President's Award for Public Impact 2023, and Stanford University has named her one of our top 2% of scientists in 2021. Please welcome Dr. Lilia Cortina.
Let me just give you a heads up. The talk does contain some strong language and some reference to sexual violence, but no graphic descriptions or depictions.
Let me start by stating the obvious. Sexual harassment is not a new problem. It's not a new focus for scientific inquiry. Psychologists and sociologists have been studying this phenomenon for years, for decades. Rigorous research that goes back to the early 80s. But it's a research record that's largely escaped the attention of folks in natural science fields and engineering and technology and medicine. The National Academies changed that. So for anyone not familiar, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is a private nonprofit organization. That's a mouthful of a name. So it's often referred to as the National Academies or NASM. And NASM is not part of the federal government, but it was founded by the federal government in 1863 to advise the nation on matters having to do with science, technology, engineering, and medicine. And one of the big products of the National Academies are these consensus study reports. And these are reports written by committees of experts that reflect their consensus on the state of the science on a particular topic. And they've commissioned consensus studies on a whole host of different topics. This is just a small sampling, but in 2016, the National Academies commissioned a report on the sexual harassment of women. So I served on the consensus study panel that wrote this report, and Dr. Paula Johnson chaired the panel. She gave a talk here in the fall, I believe. And our charge was simply to review the research record on the sexual harassment of women in higher education, with a particular focus on science, engineering, and medicine as educational settings and as employment settings, whether you're a student there or you work there in that setting. And to identify promising practices to better prevent sexual harassment in those settings and respond appropriately when it occurs. That said, that's the charge, that's the title of the report, but we actually focused on a whole host of different work settings, not limited to higher education and not limited to STEM. The research record is much broader than those particular settings. So there's a lot of conclusions that are broadly applicable to different organizations, different industries. All right, so just to start with some of the foundation questions that the report takes on, first of all, what is this thing we're talking about? What is sexual harassment and how common is this phenomenon? So we drew from a widely used definition from the social science literature that refers to conduct that derogates, demeans, or humiliates people based on their sex or gender. Now, this is a broad definition. It's an umbrella category that subsumes different subtypes of behavior. Sometimes that behavior would be what you'd think of as a come on. So, for example, sexual coercion refers to attempts to make the conditions of employment contingent upon sexual cooperation, or conditions of education contingent upon sex acts. So that would be the prototypical sleep with me or you're fired kind of scenario. That's often the first thing that comes to people's minds when they hear the term sexual harassment, but it's actually the rarest form that this behavior takes. And I'll show you some data in a moment to speak to that. A little bit more common is unwanted sexual attention. And that is exactly what it sounds like. Unwanted touching, hugging, stroking, repeated requests for dates or sexual behavior despite discouragement. And unwanted sexual attention can and sometimes does include sexual assault. So behavior can be a civil rights violation and it can be a crime. So those are the sort of come-on varieties of sexual harassment. Other times, sexual harassment is more of a put down. And in this category, we put the different forms of gender harassment. And sometimes gender harassment is purely sexist. So for example, saying things like women can't cut it in surgery or men don't belong in nursing. Other times, gender harassment is more crude and lewd. For example, referring to women as dumb sluts taking jobs away from better qualified men. So maybe it's not every day you hear statements like that in your academic seminars. Some people find it shocking, but just imagine how shocking you would find it if you heard that in your place of work, coming from one of your colleagues, coming from your students, your supervisors. All of these behaviors can be deeply upsetting, deeply problematic. They're all different forms of sexual harassment. And gender harassment is a little different because it's not about sexual conquest per se, it's more about contempt. But like I said, it's all a form of sexual harassment. Now, how do we assess these experiences in research? So in social science research, the gold standard for measuring sexual harassment is to use an instrument called the Sexual Experiences Questionnaire, or the SEQ. And this is an instrument, thank you so much, developed by Fitzgerald and colleagues, again, at U of I. It's been in use for several decades now. It's got a strong track record of validity and reliability. It only asks about personal firsthand experiences. So not hearsay, not rumors. It only focuses on the recent past, so the past year or two, to avoid problems with memory decay and recall bias. It asks about specific behaviors, not not requiring the person to attach the label sexual harassment to those behaviors. So it doesn't say, have you been sexually harassed? It says things like implied faster promotions or better treatment if you were sexually cooperative. Made unwanted attempts to establish a romantic relationship with you despite your efforts to discourage it. So there are multiple items within each of the subscales to try to get at the phenomenon comprehensively. And like I said, it doesn't attach the sexual harassment label because people often experience many of these behaviors. But then if you say, have you been sexually harassed? They'll say, oh no, I haven't experienced that. So people have varying understandings of the term sexual harassment, and it's a term that carries a lot of baggage. So we actually don't include it in the survey instruments. And so this instrument has been used in a lot of different research studies. And the kinds of findings that it results in, here's just one example from one study. A lot of studies I've conducted have produced very similar results, but this one particularly relevant for higher education. It shows you the percent of women faculty and staff who have been sexually harassed in some way in the past year at a large public university in the Midwest, not Michigan. I'll just say that. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it's not the University of Michigan. And what we find is that gender harassment is the most common form of sexual harassment in the lives of university faculty and staff. Just to walk you through a few things to notice here, 37% of these women faculty and staff had not encountered any kind of harassing conduct in the past year. Okay, but that means that 63% had. So 6 in 10 women have been sexually harassed in some way in the past year at work. And most of those incidents most of those experiences included some form of gender harassment. So all the slices of the pie in some shade of blue include gender harassing conduct. All right. This again is just data from one single institution, but every organization I've ever studied and administered an instrument like the SEQ has turned up very similar kinds of results. Generally speaking, I mean, sexual harassment rates or rates of the behavior happening are very high, and they tend to be higher in more male-dominated fields or more male-dominated departments and industries. So to bring some life to these quantitative findings, the National Academies also commissioned in-depth interviews to add to the report. And these were interviews of women in sciences, engineering, and medicine who'd been sexually harassed in some way. And they recounted some of their experiences. And then this woman recounts an experience of gender harassment, or characterizing it in general, saying it's about demeaning the woman, shutting her up in the workplace, demeaning her in front of other colleagues, telling her that she's not as capable as others are. It's not just, touching or making sexual advances. It's more at the intellectual level. They try to mentally play those mind games basically so that you won't be able to perform. Okay, so again, this is a classic illustration of gender harassment. It's intellectual marginalization is at the heart of these behaviors. All right. These are perspectives from faculty, right? Faculty and staff. What about students? We find similar patterns. Gender harassment is the most common form of sexual harassment in the lives of students, especially students in med school. And hopefully during the Q&A, there'll be time. I'd love to hear y'all's perspectives on that. So again, these are data from one institution. This is a large public university system in the Southwest. And this is the percent of women students sexually harassed in some way, specifically by faculty or staff members in the past year. And for this analysis, the data are broken down by field of study. So you can see results for students pursuing degrees in the natural and social sciences, in engineering and medicine, and then in humanities and arts and other fields outside of STEM. And what you see here are the differences across fields or disciplines is interesting. There are no differences in rates of unwanted sexual attention. Those are the very small green bars. So 2 to 4% of students have experienced some kind of unwanted sexual attention in the past year. Even lower are the rates of sexual coercion. 1% of students have experienced an attempt at sexual coercion from a faculty or staff member. 1% regardless of field. There's no field differences at all. Now, let me be really clear here. 2 to 4% is 2 to 4% too high. 1% is 1% too many students. No student should have to put up with any of this kind of abuse in return for the right to receive an education. But perhaps what's most striking about this are the very high rates of gender harassment, particularly sexist gender harassment, which are the navy blue bars. So there's more sexist gender harassment in engineering than in other sciences or fields outside of STEM, and even more sexist gender harassment and lewd and crude gender harassment in medicine compared to any other field. So what is going on in medical training? That's a question that also comes up and that my National Academies Committee really spent time on. And again, we looked to the in-depth interviews to try and understand what's with all the gender harassment in medical school. And in those interviews, medical training settings were often described as breeding grounds for abuse, residencies and other kinds of training sites. The medical students came to expect hostile, grueling conditions as sort of part and parcel of their training. Part of the awfulness that they would just have to put up with at that stage in their career, like a rite of passage. One of them said, the thing about residency training is everyone is having human rights violations. So it's just like tolerable sexual harassment. Another writes, I reported to my program director, the chief resident, and then the site director, who told me that maybe if I stopped whining so much, I would have more friends. So they basically blew off the report. So that second quote illustrates what we'd call a culture of sexual harassment. So when sexual harassment happens, the report isn't taken seriously, it's not addressed, and it's those kind of cultures where sexual harassment thrives, where we tend to see the highest rates. All right, so another thing that's clear from the research record is that sexual harassment is a complex phenomenon. It intersects with racism, with homophobia, with transphobia, and other discriminatory mindsets. So what this means is that women of color, gay and bisexual women, and trans women end up being harassed at significantly higher rates than their straight, white, cisgender counterparts. So the harms are even more concentrated on members of underrepresented groups. So the National Academies report focuses very specifically on experiences of women. This often brings up the question, what about men? Can't they also be sexually harassed? And the report doesn't take up that question, but there is a body of research that addresses it. And what it finds is that, yes, men can be sexually harassed, but it's not what people are often picturing. The typical incident would involve one man harassing another man and for not living up to masculine ideals. So what we refer to as not man enough harassment. So it's one man berating or trying to humiliate a male colleague or a male subordinate for engaging in what's seen as stereotypically female activities. So taking time off from work to help with the newborn, for expressing vulnerabilities, for being too sensitive or too small, too gay, in some way stepping outside of the boundaries of traditional heterosexual masculinity. So men do get sexually harassed, but it doesn't fit the stereotype. So we can think about the different forms of sexual harassment as a sort of iceberg. So unwanted sexual attention, sexual coercion, and sexual assault are at the very top of the iceberg. These are the behaviors that break through to public view, that make it into the news, that are widely recognized as impermissible sexual harassment. These are also the behaviors that tend to be the focus of our policies, our procedures, our penalties for harassing others, our trainings. But the research record is clear. More often than not, sexual harassment is a put down, not a come on. So the bulk of the iceberg contains examples of gender harassment, behavior that demeans or that derogates or that humiliates people based on sex or gender. And the gender harassment is submerged in this image because many people don't realize it's a form of sexual harassment, which it is. It's sexual harassment in the sense of being based on sex, which the law interprets broadly as being based on sex or gender. All right, so another question that sometimes comes up is like, yes, that gender harassment, those comments and whatnot are certainly annoying and irritating, but do they really matter? Are people actually harmed by these experiences that most of the time are a put down, not a come on? And the answer is a clear yes. Again, looking to the research record. We know from many research studies at this point that sexual harassment relates to decrements in professional and personal well-being. So the more that sexual harassment happens in an employment setting or an educational setting, the less people are satisfied with their work in that space, the less committed they are to the institution, the less they plan to stay. The more they report symptoms of anxiety and depression and substance use and abuse, and the more they report experiences that are symptoms that would be consistent with chronic stress, such as sleep disruption. And these kinds of outcomes emerge even when the sexual harassment solely consists of gender harassment. So another big conclusion of the report is that even when the sexual harassment entails nothing but sexist insult without any unwanted sexual pursuit, it takes a toll on people. It pushes people out of the department, the organization, the field, even. So these conclusions around gender harassment are often surprising to a lot of people. People assume that the come-ons must be worse or more egregious than the put-downs. A great meta-analysis came out a few years ago that drives that point home nicely. So if anyone who's not familiar, meta-analysis is simply a technique where you combine sort of all known studies of a topic, you pool the data, and you look at what effects emerge consistently, and you quantify the magnitude of the effect. So this particular study pooled the data from 88 studies based on surveys of over 70,000 women, and found that gender harassment has a similar impact, if not a greater impact, on various indices of work and well-being compared to unwanted sexual attention and sexual coercion. So on the right here, I've graphed some of the effect sizes just to illustrate some of this. In this case, you can see, for example, the light blue bars show you the magnitude of correlation between sexual coercion and different outcomes. So they show you the effect size for sexual coercion. Different outcomes having to do with self-reported physical health or satisfaction with the job. And you can see the effect sizes for sexual coercion are on the smaller side. Effects of gender harassment are in yellow, and they're significantly larger. So for example, look at the effects for job satisfaction at the very bottom of the graph. The effect size for gender harassment is nearly twice the size of the effect for sexual coercion. So again, this is a surprising finding to many. It flies in the face of popular wisdom. How do we make sense of conclusions like this? The authors have a great explanation in their article. They write that sexual coercion and unwanted sexual attention are traumatic for the people involved, more likely to result in court cases and public reporting. However, in many work settings, these intense experiences are low-frequency events. The more frequent, less intense, and often unchallenged gender harassment, sexist discrimination, sexist climates appear at least as detrimental for women's well-being. They should not be considered lesser forms of sexism. Another important findings from the literature to remember is that one need not be directly targeted with these behaviors to feel the negative effects. You could think of it like secondhand smoke, such that the harms kind of spread to others sharing that same environment. Witnesses, work groups, teams, even entire departments. And we lose a lot of good people because of it. So when women are sexually harassed, they leave. Their coworkers leave. Even the men leave. They don't want to stick around and watch their valued colleague be disparaged and devalued, and they don't want to become the next target themselves. So all faculty, staff, students, regardless of gender, suffer from spending time trying to work or learn in a misogynistic or humiliating or degrading environment. So it behooves our organizations to do whatever we can to roll back this behavior to the extent that we can. So then the next question, of course, is how do we do that? What do we do about this problem? How can we better prevent sexual harassment and, again, respond appropriately when it occurs? The National Academies report goes into these questions in great detail. If anyone wants more practical advice, I would strongly encourage you to dig into the report. Some questions that sometimes come up: should men stop meeting privately with women students, with women trainees? Should they stop taking women to, research sites in the field? And my answer to that question is an emphatic no. One problem with this question is that this would effectively cut off women from a lot of important mentoring and important training that happens in one-on-one meetings. So that kind of individualized attention is vital in a lot of careers, in a lot of industries. You will not get ahead without it. Another problem with this question is that it's essentially grounded in a myth. And that's the myth of the false accusation. This idea that, well, women lie, women fabricate, they exaggerate these claims of sexual harassment. They make much ado about nothing. That is really a falsehood, a fiction. There's no truth to it. There's no evidence to support that belief. What there is evidence to support is that formal accusations of sexual harassment are rare, and false accusations are even rarer. So a man is more likely to be sexually harassed by another man than falsely accused by a woman. That said, maybe a senior male colleague does not want to meet privately with women students, doesn't want to admit women to his lab, doesn't want to take women into the field. That's his prerogative. But then he cannot meet privately with men students. He can't admit men to his lab, cannot take men into the field. To do otherwise would be engaging in blatant sex discrimination. Okay, we can't discriminate based on sex in our training or opportunities. Title IX, yep, exactly. I'm glad the lawyer at the front is nodding. So we don't recommend engaging in one form of sex discrimination to address another. What about reporting? Should we sit back and build bigger and better reporting systems, sit back and wait for victims to file in with their complaints? This is what basically our organizations have tried for years, right? With limited success. Very few sexually harassed women and even fewer harassed men ever report their harassment to anyone in authority. Reporting rates have changed very little over time. These two graphs illustrate it. So on the left, you see data from employees of a large university who have been sexually harassed in some way. Only about 6% came forward to file a formal complaint. Fast forward the clock 20 years, the data on the right are graduate student employees of a public university. Of those who were sexually harassed in some way, only about 6% came forward to file a formal complaint. There are lots of factors that stand in the way of formal reporting. Fears of disbelief, blame, shame, humiliation, inaction, retaliation, worry that it's going to damage your career, your relationship with other people in the field, your future income prospects. There are a lot of reasons why people don't file complaints. So we need to think outside the box to address this problem. We need to look beyond policies and trainings that focus mostly on reporting and focus mostly on sexually threatening acts of abuse. Those kinds of acts simply don't happen without a firm foundation of disrespect. So one of the strategies the report hits hard on is to overhaul the institutional cultures and the climates that enable disrespect to thrive. So we need to cultivate cultures of respect. How exactly do we do that? That's a tall order. There's another body of research that's part of what I study also is on workplace incivility that talks about a lot about how to cultivate more civil, respectful climates in our organizations. And it has a lot of concrete suggestions. Just to share a few here, take respect seriously and make it part of the criteria in hiring, evaluations, and promotions of people throughout the organization. We can also look closely at our everyday practices. So is your department a space where people run around yelling at the staff or the students? Are women routinely interrupted in meetings? Or do you have a star culture where some people are just so brilliant or so famous, or they bring in so many grant dollars that they're above the rules and they can behave badly without any consequence? We need to rethink all those kinds of norms. We can also look around at the built environment. So who's celebrated in the photographs, the portraits, the statues, and who is missing? So universities and academic medical centers are often covered with walls of white men. This is the dude wall in my own department of psychology at Michigan. I'm happy to see I did not find a dude wall in this university, so well done. Maybe I haven't found it, but it got removed, which is awesome. That's unusual. I've given this talk like this in a lot of different places. Usually there's some kind of wall like this. Some would think walls don't really matter. It's kind of a non-issue, but the walls send a powerful message about who belongs, who is valued, and who is not. So the walls might be a good place to start if we want to make our environments more respectful and inclusive. And I'm running short on time, so I'm going to buzz through some of these final slides here to leave time for Q&A. I've just summarized a 300-page report down to a short, sweet 30 minutes. I encourage you could download the report for free on the National Academies website, or you could purchase it on Amazon. It's very readable. It's written in sort of non-specialized, non-jargony kind of way, very accessible. There's a lot of good stuff there. And 5 years have passed since the release of the report. New developments have come about. I will just highlight one very quickly that I love. It made it into federal law, basically. So some of you have probably heard of the CHIPS Act, which is known for its superconductor investments, but it has a whole section on preventing sexual harassment in the scientific workforce. And this section of the act began as a different bill, originally sponsored by Eddie Bernice Johnson in the House and then Senator Kamala Harris in the Senate. It got folded into the CHIPS Act and got signed into law. So now there's a lot more money to fund sexual harassment research and programming and creation of a new code of conduct for scientists. So there's a lot of good stuff there, and it cites the report heavily. So that's awesome to see. All right, I'm going to skip over. Oh, great. Oh, yay. Go to Illinois. 5 more minutes. Okay, thank you. Another development that is still very, very active is an action collaborative on preventing sexual harassment in higher education was founded by the National Academies. And this is simply an action collaborative is a coalition of the willing, people and institutions that come together to work on a system-wide problem and develop innovative solutions. This particular action collaborative includes 55 institutions of higher ed, research institutes, national labs, all coming together to share resources and ideas and practices and programs around preventing sexual harassment and then trying to remedy it. So responding appropriately after the fact. I don't think Rosalind Franklin is on the list, but they take new members every January. So you too could join the Action Collaborative, but you don't have to join to benefit from it. They release, a lot of the point is to release resources publicly. So there are annual meetings where they share some of the most innovative practices that are coming up, an annual report and some publications that report out about those practices, and an online repository of work, which I find super useful. It's a digital repository that anybody can access. You don't have to be a member institution, but it's members submitting descriptions of the practices and programs they're putting in place to try and move the needle on sexual harassment. And the digital repository is organized by different topic areas. It's tabbed. It's well organized. You have to spend some time to get used to it. But if you want to know about how different places are putting in place ally programs or civility trainings or leaders toolkits, there's lots of different topics you can search on. You can download the full description, and then usually a link to even more details on the websites. So lots of cool ideas for anyone who's working in this space and wants to make a dent here. Publications. Okay, let me leave you with a few questions to ponder. So, sexual harassment policies, reporting procedures, and penalties often focus heavily on unwanted sexual attention and coercion. This is a focus which is absolutely necessary, but altogether insufficient. So it's not going to move the needle in a big enough way when it comes to sexual harassment, because it's only taking aim at the tip of this iceberg, right? So remember, more often than not, sexual harassment is a put down, not a come on. So what are we doing to address the many slights and indignities that combine to relegate women to the margins of organizational life? What steps can we take to transform institutional cultures to be more respectful, more inclusive, to treat all people with dignity, no matter their sex, gender, race, sexuality, or any other dimensions of difference? So if we can start to develop answers to questions like that, we might start to move the needle on this problem. All right, with that, I have left 10 minutes for questions. Yes. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, am I on Zoom? Okay. Can you hear me? Great. All right. Any questions? Thank you so much. Questions from the audience first?
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I have a question about if you make a distinction between bullying behaviors and sexual harassment, because some of the things that you talked about sounded more like bullying behaviors to me, what we traditionally call bullying behaviors. Would you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. What's the difference between bullying and sexual harassment? I actually see this as very overlapping kind of problems. Like I said, my other line of research is on workplace incivility, which is sometimes referred to as workplace bullying. And I have a number of studies that look at incivility as sort of a veiled form of sexism and racism, that it's a form of hostility towards underrepresented folks without using racial epithets, without using gendered slurs, and that often gets overlooked. Then it doesn't get covered by anti-discrimination policies. People chalk it up, blow it off, or chalk it up to be, it's just a joke. Oh, I didn't mean anything, I'm having a bad day. So it gets excused more readily. But I actually think, I find it kind of peculiar that bullying, I mean, the research literature, the practitioner literature, it's very separate from sexual harassment and other kinds of identity-based abuses. I actually think it's part and parcel of the same phenomenon.
Do we have an online one? Okay, I'll come here first.
Thank you for your talk. So, in addition to the policies and procedures being at that early top, I feel like the attention and the big scandals that come out about sexual harassment are usually about the types of, very severe outcomes, think that were going on for 10 years and suddenly, came to fruition. And so I think that really plays into this idea that those are the things that matter and that count as sexual harassment. And then at the, other kind of lower level, it's often like there's an internal process for doing a report and it's more hush hush. Nobody knows about it. Somebody may get to change institutions and repeat this behavior. Like, what can we do as an institution to make those types of, sexual harassment incidents, I guess, more well known or more, I don't know. I don't want to say publicize them, but sort of make it clear, like, these things have consequences too. This is what we do. This is, not tolerated, so that it's not just about, University of Michigan's infamous events in my alma mater from grad school. So anyway.
That is a great question. One of the things the National Academies report tries to do is really raise awareness about gender harassment. We do need to take it seriously. And so we're starting to see more institutions of higher ed talk about it, think about it, figure out how to put it into policies. I agree, it needs to have more visibility in the sense that this is not okay. This is not just a minor irritant, but it's really undermining people's work and well-being. To use an example from University of Michigan, one of our various scandals, one of our provosts was fired in a cloud of shame in recent years for 20 years of sexual harassment. And a report was commissioned, investigation was commissioned and released very publicly. Anyone can go on the web and read this. And it describes only a subset of the behaviors that they found evidence for. And a couple of them are clear examples of gender harassment. And some colleagues said, oh, see, look, most of what he did was a come on, not a put down. This is an exception. And my response is, I bet he did way more gender harassment, way more crude and lewd comments in the classroom, which is what made it into the report. And the investigators didn't include it because it didn't seem that bad comparatively to, he was behaving badly in many respects. But I think we need to change those practices so that people do understand. I think of it literally as a foundation, kind of like a gateway drug, if you will. Like, if I could do this, maybe I'll try that, and that, and that. So I do think we should think about it more openly. And I actually avoid terms like characterizing some behaviors as more egregious than others or more severe, because that kind of reifies the myth that, well, it's really only the super assaultive stuff, which is bad. The other stuff is no big deal. And the research shows that actually the other stuff, when it happens every day, I don't even want to call it small behavior because it might not feel at all small when you've heard it every day for the last year and you have to work with this person for the next 10 years and you can't figure out how to get out of the situation. And it doesn't feel small at all.
I think we're going to take one from online.
An anonymous attendee asks, I have seen here that white women actually harass women of color. What is your experience based on your work? So,
yeah, that sounds like racial harassment. And again, we think about these different behaviors as if they were distinct phenomena. We do that in the research studies. We do that in the law to some extent. But I think of all these things as just different forms of abuse, intimidation, insult, and women engage in them. People of color engage in them. The fact that I'm a Cuban American woman doesn't absolve me from, I make my own missteps. So I think sometimes we make an assumption that it's the straight white men who are doing all of this. And whenever we've looked at sort of who did it in research studies, we find that there are a lot of people doing it, unfortunately.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The first question is that what is the university's responsibility for making these known, both for the faculty and also for the next hire, the next place they may go? Do you keep it? Is the university obligated to tell prospective universities or of this activity? And the second question I have real quick is, I was actually an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, and I was seen by Dr. Anderson. And that was no secret. I was told before I went to see him of his activities, so it was pretty well known. So this 6% probably of people reporting probably hasn't changed, or doesn't sound like it's changed very much. I mean, how can it be that the university doesn't strive to identify activities? I mean, I could say it also might occur other places too, activities occurring, but it never seems to get to the administration. And they nothing ever happens until something really serious happens. And then everything falls, like with the Anderson business.
Should have taken notes on your first question because I had a thought and I lost it.
University responsibility. University responsibility.
It's passing the raster. Okay, thank you. That's why I pulled this up. So yes, the responsibilities around, so when someone has engaged in harassment and been investigated, maybe they know they will be found responsible, or there has been a finding, and they quietly leave and they're hired by another institution. A lot of universities and colleges are putting in place changes to intercept that past the harasser problem. This is one of the papers, a couple of the papers actually on the Action Collaborative website walk through how UC Davis is doing this, and I think University of Wisconsin was the other one that submitted a paper. Putting new policies in place around reference checking for applicants, and new policies around the university's ability to divulge information about investigations and that sort of thing. Without those kinds of policies, the harasser's former employment record gets protected by privacy laws, essentially. So this is an issue, so I'm glad you mentioned it. The other issue about Anderson. Yeah. So part of the problem is also, so I'll use the more recent example of the provost, because I've read that report more recently. He was engaging in bad behavior going back 20 years. And part of what's so shameful for the university is that women had come forward. They had told this department chair, this dean knew about it. This dean gave him a talking to and thought that he had fixed it. And the harasser was promoted through the ranks from junior faculty to senior faculty to dean to provost. And several times it came up. This kind of commentary is happening in his classrooms. This report came up 10 or 15 years ago and they got ignored. Yeah, and how that happened. So when at some point, and I don't know what finally triggered it, the university president just very publicly fired him because of all this and commissioned the report and tried to do damage control and so on and so forth. So part of the problem is also not intervening because that's the other issue is that people do come forward, they do make reports. And part of the problem is what happens after that.
It might be at time.
Do a lightning round question. You want to or no? Okay. We'll take down the name of the other question and get back to them. So we have a good question. So we'll get that answer for them. So I'm just going to wrap up here. So I just wanted to first give you a little token of thank you. That is a little gift for you. Thank you so much. And then I just wanted to say on behalf of the WISH committee and my co-chairs, thank you everyone for attending. I want to give a special thank you to our administrative committee as well. Kara Bass, Brian Roush, Nicole Bree, Jay Moat, and Amy Hilsey. And also a thank you from our extended advisory committee. We do have a YouTube channel as well as webpage and email communications. So I just want to ensure that everybody knows that we will be having next year's WISH Symposium as well as seminar series. So please keep an eye on your email as well as our website for that information. Thank you all again and have a wonderful afternoon.